The thunder of the sea against the steel hull was constant, a background heartbeat for the men and women serving aboard the USS Valor. Inside its sprawling decks, life moved with rhythm and order boots striking metal grates, machinery humming, sailors calling instructions. For Emma Collins, the sound had become a strange kind of comfort, a reminder that the carrier was both fortress and prison. Her job was simple. She loaded ammunition. Day after day, hour after hour, she stacked crates, checked inventory, and ensured every shell and missile was accounted for. It was tedious, backbreaking work, but she embraced it. Most sailors hated the assignment. Ammo decks were hot, noisy, and far from the open air. The lack of sunlight gnawed at some. But Emma preferred the shadows. Down here, no one paid much attention. She could fade into the background, just another uniform among dozens. "Collins, hand me that crate." A voice barked over the din. Emma turned, grabbed the heavy box without hesitation, and passed it across the line. Her movements were practiced, almost mechanical, the muscles in her arms straining but steady. She never complained. She never hesitated. "Damn, you're strong for someone your size," joked Petty Officer Ramirez, wiping sweat from his brow. He was twice her weight, broad-shouldered, and still struggled to keep pace. Emma just gave a faint smile. "Crates don't carry themselves," she replied, keeping her tone light. Ramirez laughed and shook his head. "You're something else." The others might have agreed, though none said it aloud. Emma's precision was unusual. She moved with the discipline of someone who had been under pressure far greater than a supply line. Every box she lifted, every shell she inspected, she handled with the same seriousness as if lives depended on it. To her, they did. The truth was, Emma knew exactly what these weapons could do. She had seen them in use, not just as inventory. Years ago, in a desert halfway across the world, she had carried them in a very different context amid explosions, screams, and gunfire. But here, on the carrier, she didn't talk about that. To most, she was simply Petty Officer Second-Class Collins. Quiet, hardworking, dependable. She avoided late-night card games, skipped rowdy gatherings, and declined invitations to drink. Instead, she spent her free hours in the gym or sitting alone in the mess hall, a book in hand. Her crewmates learned not to pry. Some whispered theories. "She's just shy. Maybe she messed up in her last unit. Nah, she's too squared away for that. Probably just doesn't like people." Emma ignored them all. The less they knew, the better. One evening, after a long shift, she sat on her bunk in the narrow sleeping quarters. The room smelled faintly of oil and sweat, the scent of 100 lives crammed into steel walls. She opened her locker, pulling out a folded T-shirt. Beneath the stack of clothing, her eyes caught the glint of something metallic, the metal. It lay there quietly, a small reminder of a past she wished she could erase. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool surface, and a memory surged sand in her teeth, a comrade's blood on her hands, the deafening roar of gunfire. Her stomach twisted. She slammed the locker shut before anyone noticed. The carrier swayed slightly, a reminder of the ocean beneath. Emma sat back, forcing herself to breathe. Out here, thousands of miles from home, she thought maybe she could outrun the ghosts. Maybe anonymity was possible. But anonymity had its own cost. In the ammo deck the next day, Ramirez sidled up beside her as they stacked shells. "You ever think you're wasting your time down here?" he asked suddenly. Emma arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You could be doing more. You handle gear better than half the chiefs. It's like you've done this for years." She shrugged. "A job's a job. Somebody has to do it." He gave her a skeptical look. "Still, you don't seem like the type to settle for hauling crates forever." Emma forced a smile, But inside, her chest tightened. She had settled. Not because she lacked ambition, but because ambition had cost too much before. She wanted no more leadership, no more attention. Just quiet. Just work. That evening, as the ship prepared for inspection week, a subtle tension spread across the decks. Sailors scrubbed floors, polished boots, and aligned their bunks with mathematical precision. Emma kept her head down, as always, though a ripple of unease prickled in her chest. Inspections meant scrutiny, and scrutiny was dangerous. She told herself no one would look too closely at her locker. It was tidy, neat, perfectly in order. Still, the thought of the metal lying hidden beneath her clothes gnawed at her. For years, she had managed to hide. But as she carried yet another heavy crate to the storage racks, her muscles straining, she couldn't shake the feeling that shadows never lasted forever. And aboard the USS Valor, shadows were scarce. Life aboard the USS Valor had its own rhythm, a carefully orchestrated dance of duties, schedules, and routines. Sailors learned to live in close quarters, eating shoulder to shoulder, sleeping stacked, in narrow bunks, and carrying out orders with mechanical precision. In such an environment, everyone was observed. Every habit, every quirk, every flaw stood out like a beacon. Emma Collins knew this. She had spent her first months on the carrier, trying to be invisible, blending into the blur of uniforms and sweat-soaked faces. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't erase the way she worked, the efficiency, the quiet confidence, the way every task seemed second nature. And sailors, by nature, talked. It began with small comments. Collins doesn't miss a single step in drills. She carries those crates like they're nothing. You notice how she checks every round twice? Like she's preparing for inspection, even when no one's looking. Rumors spread like wildfire on a ship. The walls were too thin, the quarters too tight. By the end of the first week, some swore she must have been prior enlisted in a special operations unit. Others whispered she'd seen more combat than her age suggested. Still, no one dared ask outright. Emma deflected every question with a practiced smile or a dry remark. Ramirez, never shy about poking, tried one afternoon as they stacked missile components. "You ever do anything before this? Like, before ammo duty?" he asked, sweat dripping down his temple. Emma glanced at him briefly. "I did what everyone does. Trained, served, got sent here." "That's not what I mean." Ramirez leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You carry yourself different, like you've been downrange." Emma's hands stilled for a fraction of a second before she resumed her work. "You watch too many movies," she muttered. He chuckled, though the look he gave her lingered. With curiosity, others noticed too. Petty Officer Stevens, who prided himself on being the fastest during drills, often tried to outpace her. But no matter how quickly he worked, Emma matched him with calm precision. It wasn't a contest for her, but it gnawed at Stevens's pride. "Collins is like a damn robot," he muttered one night in the mess hall. "Doesn't even break a sweat." "She's just squared away," another sailor replied. "Wish half of us had that discipline." Stevens smirked. "Squared away? More like hiding something." The table chuckled, though unease threaded the laughter. Nobody liked mysteries aboard a ship where trust and predictability meant survival. Emma heard some of these whispers, though she pretended not to. She learned long ago that silence was its own kind of armor. People filled silence with their own explanations, and those explanations, no matter how wild, were safer than the truth. But at night, when the hum of engines filled the berthing compartments, Emma lay awake, staring at the metal ceiling inches above her face. She could hear their words echoing, and part of her wondered how long she could maintain the facade. It wasn't arrogance that betrayed her, it was muscle memory. Her body remembered things she tried to forget. how to check a rifle with blindfolded speed, how to clear a room with measured steps, how to keep calm under fire. She couldn't switch it off. Even handling ammunition, she treated every movement as though failure meant lives lost. One evening during a fire drill, her instincts betrayed her again. The alarm blared, red lights flashing through the corridors. Sailors scrambled, some fumbling gear, others shouting orders. Emma moved swiftly, securing her station, checking on the younger crew beside her. When one sailor dropped a tool in panic, she bent, retrieved it, and barked, "Keep it together. Secure your post." The young man froze, eyes wide, then obeyed. Her tone was sharp, commanding, not the voice of a quiet ammo handler, but of someone used to giving orders. When the drill ended, Ramirez approached her with a grin. "Didn't know you had that voice in you, Collins." She shrugged. "Somebody had to say something." He studied her a moment longer. "Yeah, but not everybody sounds like a chief when they do it." Her chest tightened. She forced a laugh and brushed it off, but she knew her mask had slipped. Later that night, she returned to her locker. The medal sat hidden beneath folded uniforms, silent yet accusing. She didn't touch it. Just looking at it made her throat close. If the whispers grew any louder, if anyone dug too deeply, the truth would surface. And the truth was unbearable. She remembered the sand, the stench of burning metal, the deafening roar of explosions. She remembered dragging Corporal Jensen by his vest, bullets kicking up dirt inches from her boots. She remembered the moment she realized not everyone would make it home. The medal had been pinned to her chest weeks later, in a ceremony that felt hollow. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, but all she heard were the voices of those who hadn't survived. She never forgave herself for standing alive while others weren't. Now, aboard the Valor, she thought she had escaped that weight. But even in the belly of the carrier, among crates and shells, her past clung to her like smoke. She became more guarded, speaking less, focusing harder on the work. Yet the whispers only grew. To some, her silence was confirmation. To others, it was a challenge. During one late shift, Stevens leaned against a stack of crates, smirking. "So Collins, what are you really doing down here? You some kind of undercover officer? CIA? Secret commando?" A few sailors laughed nervously. Emma didn't look up. "I'm doing my job." "Come on, you expect us to believe you're just another ammo pusher. You work like you're training for war every day." Her jaw tightened. She forced herself to stay calm. "If you spent half as much energy working as you do talking, we'd finish this faster." The group laughed louder, this time at Stevens. He scowled, but didn't push further. Emma returned to her task, her hands steady, though her chest burned. It was always like this. Push back just enough to keep suspicion at bay, but never enough to reveal the truth. What none of them realized was that Emma wasn't hiding to protect herself. She was hiding to protect them. If they knew what she had done, if they knew why the medal haunted her, they wouldn't look at her the same. Some might admire her, but others would fear her, and fear had no place in a crew that needed unity. Still, the whispers never stopped. They grew louder each week, reaching ears she hadn't expected. She didn't know it yet, but even the Admiral would soon hear them. And once the Admiral looked closely, there would be no more hiding. The carrier rocked gently on the open Pacific, its engines humming like a giant heartbeat beneath the decks. The endless ocean stretched beyond the portholes, but for Emma Collins, the world often shrank to the narrow steel walls of her berth. Most nights, after long shifts in the ammunition bay, she collapsed onto her bunk and tried to disappear into exhaustion. But some nights, sleep wouldn't come. On those nights, she found herself sitting at the edge of her bed, staring at her locker like it was some kind of shrine or a tomb. The locker looked ordinary from the outside. Dented metal, paint chipped, with her last name stenciled across the front. To anyone else, it held nothing but spare uniforms, boots, and toiletries. But Emma knew better. At the bottom, beneath neatly folded shirts, was the thing she wished she could throw into the sea. The medal. It was small, barely larger than her palm, attached to a ribbon faded from years of disuse. A decoration most would wear proudly on formal uniforms, a symbol of honor. But for Emma, it was a weight heavier than any ammunition crate she had ever lifted. That night, unable to resist, she opened the locker slowly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure the berth was empty. The others had gone, leaving only the faint hum of the ventilation system and the distant clang of machinery. She reached inside, pulling the metal into the dim light. The metal gleamed, catching the glow of the overhead bulb. She stared at it until her vision blurred. Her mind dragged her back. Sand in her teeth, smoke rising in the distance. The sharp, metallic scent of blood mixed with gunpowder. Screams carried over the wind. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. Her unit had been ambushed in a narrow village alley, the air erupting with gunfire. Emma remembered hitting the ground, instinctively returning fire, adrenaline flooding her veins. She remembered dragging Private Harris behind a wall, pressing her hand against his bleeding chest while shouting for a medic. But Harris hadn't made it. Neither had Lieutenant Morales or Corporal Jensen, three names that never stopped echoing in her head. She had saved others that day, pulled two men out of the line of fire, organized defensive cover, directed air support until reinforcements arrived. Her commanding officer had called it extraordinary bravery. Headquarters had called it heroism. Emma called it survival. Nothing more. Weeks later, in a polished ceremony far from the battlefield, an officer had pinned the medal to her chest. Cameras flashed, hands clapped her back, speeches praised her courage. But all she could think of were the body bags loaded onto helicopters, the families that would never hear their loved ones' voices again. The applause had made her nauseous. The weight of the medal on her chest had made her feel like she was suffocating. Afterward, she stuffed it away. She requested a transfer, begged for reassignment to someplace quiet, someplace she could vanish. The Navy, perhaps out of pity, granted it. She ended up here anonymous, hauling crates in the belly of the USS Valor, but the medal followed her. Like a ghost, Emma's hand trembled as she held it now. The polished surface reflected her face, but she barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw, a young woman who looked older than her years. She whispered to the empty room, "I didn't deserve this," the silence answered. Quickly, she tucked the medal back beneath the uniforms, slamming the locker shut. With more force than necessary, she leaned against it, pressing her forehead to the cool metal, fighting to slow her breathing. But the past was never far. It clawed at her in dreams, in flashes that invaded the quiet moments. Sometimes she woke drenched in sweat, convinced she still heard the stutter of gunfire. Other times, she jolted awake with names on her lips, Harris, Morales, Jensen, like unfinished prayers. The medal was the most dangerous piece of all. If anyone saw it, the questions would never stop. Why was a decorated sailor buried in ammo duty? What had she done to earn it? What was she hiding? She imagined the whispers turning into stares, the curiosity twisting into suspicion. She couldn't bear it. The only way to survive was to keep the medal hidden, her past locked away where no one could touch it. But secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. One afternoon, during downtime, Ramirez flopped onto the bunk across from hers, chewing gum lazily. "Hey, Collins," he said, "you ever get any medals? You look like the type." Emma froze, then forced a laugh. "Medals? Me? No. I just move boxes," Ramirez grinned. Come on. You're telling me you've never been recognized? You work harder than anyone on this ship. She shrugged. Recognition doesn't matter. Maybe not to you, but still. Feels like there's more to you than you let on. Emma felt her throat tighten, but she kept her face calm. You think too much, Ramirez. He chuckled, giving up the chase for now, but his words lingered. That night, Emma lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts circled like vultures. Maybe she should get rid of the metal, toss it overboard when no one was looking, let the ocean swallow it. But she couldn't, not because she wanted it, but because it wasn't hers alone. It represented the men who hadn't come. Home, the lives lost. To throw it away would feel like erasing them, so she kept it. Hidden, locked away, and prayed no one would ever find it. But prayers have limits. On a ship with constant inspections, tight quarters and eyes everywhere, secrets never stayed. Buried forever. Emma didn't know it yet, but the metal that haunted her was about to betray her. The morning the Admiral came aboard, the Valor felt different. Word had spread the night before. Whispers traveled through mess halls, across workstations, and between bunks. Admiral Hayes is coming. The name carried weight. Some sailors had only seen him in pictures. Others had heard stories. They said his eyes could spot a smudge on a boot from 20 feet away. They said he had zero tolerance for sloppy work, excuses, or anything less than excellence. By dawn, the ship was humming with nervous energy. Sailors polished every inch of visible metal, scrubbed decks until they shone, and checked and rechecked their uniforms. Even the most careless among them seemed transformed. Suddenly disciplined, suddenly alert. Emma Collins watched it all unfold quietly. She polished her boots like everyone else, straightened her bunk, and folded her uniforms with crisp precision. Her space was already immaculate. Emma lived as though every day might bring inspection. But even as she went through the motions, unease gnawed at her chest. Admirals didn't usually care about the ammo deck. It was tucked far below, away from the visible ceremonial parts of the ship. But Emma knew better than to assume safety. If Admiral Hayes truly wanted to leave no stone unturned, he would find his way down here too. And if he did, her mind flicked to the metal hidden at the bottom of her locker. Just the thought made her pulse quicken. "Hey, Collins," Ramirez said, adjusting his collar nervously as he passed her. "You think he'll actually come down here?" "Maybe," Emma replied without looking up. Ramirez groaned. "Man, why? We're not exactly glamorous. We just haul boxes." "What's he gonna find here, Dust?" Emma didn't answer. She just kept wiping her boots until they gleamed. By mid-morning, the Admiral arrived. His presence was like a shift in gravity. Every corridor he stepped into seemed to stiffen. He wasn't tall, but there was something in his bearing that demanded attention. His uniform was immaculate, ribbons and insignia gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. His face was weathered, lined with years of command, but his eyes sharp, calculating, missed nothing. The ship's captain trailed behind him, along with a small entourage of officers carrying clipboards. Everywhere Hayes walked, sailors snapped to attention, spines straight, voices loud and clear. "Admiral on deck." Someone barked as he entered the main hangar bay. Emma was working 2 levels below when she heard the call echo down the steel corridors. A ripple of tension spread through the ammo crew. Even the air felt heavier. "They say he once dismissed a whole unit for sloppy lockers," Stevens muttered, running a rag over the nearest crate. "Just sent them all packing." "Shut up," Ramirez hissed. "He'll hear you." Emma said nothing. She tightened the straps on a pallet and tried to focus, but her mind was elsewhere. She had spent months avoiding notice, but today notice might come to her whether she wanted it or not. Minutes dragged. The sound of polished shoes on metal ladders grew closer. Voices echoed down the corridor. And then, suddenly, there he was. Admiral Hayes stepped into the ammo bay. The room seemed to shrink around him. Sailors stood straighter, movements crisp, eyes forward. The Admiral walked slowly, deliberately, his gaze sweeping over everything, the stacks of munitions, the tools, the sailors themselves. Emma felt his eyes brush past her as he scanned the crew. For a moment, she thought she was safe, but then he stopped. Not at her, but near her. He watched as she lifted a heavy crate onto a rack, muscles straining, but her movements controlled. Efficient, almost graceful. She set it down with precision, exactly in line with the others. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The Admiral's gaze lingered. "Name?" he asked sharply. Emma straightened. "Petty Officer Collins, sir." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How long have you been aboard the Valor, Collins?" 10 months, sir." "Always in ammunition?" "Yes, sir." For a heartbeat, silence stretched. Emma kept her face neutral, her tone steady, but inside, her chest was tight. The Admiral studied her a moment longer before nodding once. "Carry on." He moved on, but Emma felt the weight of his attention like a brand. She exhaled slowly, her pulse hammering. Around her, the other sailors relaxed slightly, as though holding their breath during the exchange. Ramirez gave her a quick glance, his brows raised in silent question. Emma ignored it, turning back to her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Hayes hadn't just been curious, he had noticed something. Something about the way she moved, the way she carried herself. The inspection continued, the Admiral questioning sailors, checking tools, even running a finger along a shelf to test for dust. He missed nothing. When he reached the row of lockers, Emma's heart skipped. "Open them," Hayes ordered. Her stomach dropped. She forced herself to stay composed, but her palms were slick with sweat. One by one, the lockers were opened. The Admiral examined them with quick, critical eyes. Some sailors got sharp reprimands for clutter, others quiet nods of approval. Emma's turn crept closer, each second tightening the knot in her chest. She told herself it was fine. Her locker was immaculate. Perfectly folded uniforms, boots aligned, toiletries squared away. He would see nothing unusual. Nothing unless he looked too deep. Unless his gaze landed on the bottom shelf. Her mind raced. Could she distract him? Should she volunteer to open it herself, positioning her body to block the view? Should she pray he passed her by? But prayers rarely worked aboard the Valor. As the Admiral approached her row, Emma stood at attention. Her face calm, her eyes forward. But inside, her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. And though she didn't know it yet, this inspection would mark the beginning of the end of her anonymity. The metal, the past, the ghosts she thought she had buried, they were closer to the surface than ever. The ammo deck was silent, except for the Admiral's footsteps. Each click of his polished shoes against the steel-grated floor seemed louder than the hum of the ship's engines. Sailors shifted nervously, eyes fixed forward, hands clasped behind their backs. Emma Collins stood among them, spine straight, face calm, every muscle taut. Her heart pounded in her chest, but outwardly she was the picture of composure. She'd trained herself to be invisible, to move like part of the machinery of the carrier. But invisibility had its limits, and now the Admiral's inspection had marched straight toward her. "Open the next locker," Admiral Hayes ordered, his voice clipped and precise. Petty Officer Ramirez, standing beside Emma, swallowed hard and swung his locker open. The Admiral leaned in, scanned the neatly folded uniforms, the organized row of boots, the squared toiletries. His eyes flicked over everything with military sharpness. After a long pause, he nodded once. "Acceptable." Ramirez exhaled in relief, though he didn't dare let it show. And then Hayes's gaze shifted to Emma. "Collins," he said. "Yours." Her pulse spiked. She stepped forward, hands steady despite the storm inside her, and unlatched the locker door. The hinges squeaked faintly as the metal swung open. Inside was perfection. Shirts folded with crisp edges, trousers stacked, boots lined like soldiers in formation. For a moment, Hayes said nothing. His eyes swept the locker once, twice, searching for flaws. Then he crouched. Emma's stomach dropped. At the bottom shelf, half hidden beneath the corner of a shirt, the metal glimmered faintly in the fluorescent light. It was only a sliver of silver, but it shone like a spotlight. Hayes reached down, plucked it free, and held it up to the light. His eyes narrowed. The ribbon dangled between his fingers, unmistakable, undeniable. The room froze. A murmur rippled through the sailors standing nearby. Their eyes widened as they recognized what the Admiral was holding. Not a generic service pin, not a training award, but a medal that spoke of something more. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to reach out, to snatch it back, to slam the locker shut and erase the moment. But her arms stayed rigid at her sides. Hayes turned the medal slowly, studying it. His face betrayed nothing, but the silence around him was deafening. Finally, he looked up at her. "Explain this," he said. Emma swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "Sir, it's nothing." "Nothing?" His voice cut like steel. "This is not nothing, Collins. Where did you get it?" Her jaw clenched. She stared straight ahead, refusing to answer. The Admiral stood, slipping the medal into his palm. He addressed the officer beside him. "Note this. Petty Officer Collins. My office." Immediately after inspection, the officer scribbled on his clipboard. Emma felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. Her crewmates stared in stunned silence. Ramirez's mouth hung open. Stevens's eyes darted between her and the Admiral, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Carry on," Hayes commanded, moving to the next locker as if nothing had happened. But for Emma, everything had changed. The inspection dragged on, but she barely heard it. Her mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. The gleam of the metal, the Admiral's voice, the sudden exposure of the secret she had guarded so fiercely. When Hayes finally left the deck, the tension broke. Sailors began whispering, voices hushed but urgent. "Did you see that? She had a medal. What kind? Looked like valor. Combat decoration. No way? Collins? The quiet one?" Ramirez approached cautiously. "Emma," he whispered, eyes wide. You never told me." "Don't," she snapped, sharper than intended. He froze, then nodded, backing off. She turned away, her hands trembling despite her effort. To stay calm. The medal wasn't supposed to surface. Not here. Not like this. Minutes later, a messenger appeared. "Collins, the Admiral wants you. Now." Every head in the bay turned. Emma straightened, forced her breathing steady, and followed the messenger out. Her boots rang against the deck as she walked, each step echoing louder in her head. The corridors felt tighter than ever, the steel walls pressing close as she climbed the ladders to the upper decks. She could feel the stares of passing sailors. Word was spreading already. By the time she reached the Admiral's office, her nerves were raw. The aide outside the door nodded stiffly and ushered her in. Admiral Hayes sat behind a desk, the medal resting on the polished wood before him. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he turned the medal slowly between his fingers, as if weighing not just the medal, but the story it carried. "Collins," he said at last, his voice low but sharp. "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the ship and the distant thrum of engines. Finally, Hayes looked at her, his gaze piercing. Why is a decorated sailor hiding in my ammunition deck? Emma's mouth went dry. She searched for words, but none came easily. She had spent so long avoiding this conversation, burying the past under layers of silence. Now, dragged into the light, she felt naked. Answer me, Hayes pressed. Her throat worked. Sir, it's complicated. Make it simple. She hesitated, then whispered, because I don't want it. I don't deserve it. The Admiral's brows rose slightly. You don't deserve it? This medal isn't given for nothing. It means you showed extraordinary bravery. So I'll ask again. What are you doing down there, hiding? Her chest ached. The words pressed at her lips, memories flooding, ghosts stirring. But still she hesitated, fighting the urge to shut down, to retreat into silence. Hayes leaned forward, his voice quiet but commanding. Collins, the Navy doesn't waste talent, and it doesn't tolerate secrets. You will explain, now. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Images crashed into her mind. Dust and smoke, blood on her hands, the lifeless faces of men she couldn't save. Her grip on her knees tightened until her knuckles whitened. When she opened her eyes, her voice cracked as she said, That medal cost me everything, and I can't wear it like it's some badge of pride. Not when I remember what it really means. Hayes studied her silently, the medal gleaming between them on the desk. Back in the ammo bay, whispers swirled like a storm. What do you think he's saying to her? Man, if I had a medal like that, I'd show it off every chance. Not her. Collins doesn't even talk about herself. Weird, right? Ramirez shook his head slowly. Maybe it's not weird. Maybe it's heavy. No one laughed this time. In the Admiral's office, the silence stretched. Hayes tapped the medal once against the desk, then set it down firmly. You think hiding honors the dead? He asked finally. Emma's eyes snapped to his, startled. Hayes's expression was unreadable, but his voice softened slightly. You think pretending this never happened makes their sacrifice mean more? It doesn't. You cheapen it by hiding. You bury not just yourself, but them. Emma flinched. As though struck. The Admiral's words cut deep, sharper than any reprimand. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Hayes leaned back, folding his hands. We'll talk more. But understand this, Collins, your days of hiding are over. The medal lay on the desk between them, gleaming like a truth she could no longer escape. And for the first time, Emma realized her anonymity aboard the Valor had ended. Forever. The office felt smaller than it was. The walls of steel, painted in navy gray, seemed to lean inward with every passing second. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, but Emma hardly noticed. Her attention was fixed on the medal that lay between her and Admiral Hayes. It glimmered coldly against the polished desk, a shard of the past she had worked so hard to bury. She wanted to look away, but her eyes were magnetized to it, drawn by the weight of memory. Admiral Hayes didn't move. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, gaze steady on her. The silence between them was oppressive, like the calm before an explosion. You're going to explain, Hayes said finally. His tone was not harsh, but firm, leaving no room for evasion. Start from the beginning. How does a petty officer on my ammunition deck end up with a combat valor medal? Emma's throat tightened. Her first instinct was silence. Silence had kept her safe all these years, had let her blend in, unnoticed, unchallenged. But the Admiral wasn't a man you ignored. She took a breath, her voice low. I was never supposed to be here, sir. Not on the Valor, not in this role. Hayes arched a brow, but said nothing. Emma stared at her clasped hands, fingers twisting together. I served on the Hawthorne before this, during the Gulf deployment. That's where. It happened. The Admiral didn't interrupt. He let the pause stretch, letting her words unravel at their own pace. Her eyes flicked to the metal. We were on escort duty, a routine patrol. At least, it was supposed to be. Then one morning, we got hit. Not a direct strike, but close enough. Shrapnel everywhere. Fires broke out below deck. Her voice cracked. She clenched her fists to steady it. There were men trapped down there. Smoke so thick you couldn't see. The alarms were screaming. The heat was unbearable. Everyone else was retreating, sealing off the bulkheads. But I couldn't leave them. Her chest tightened as images swarmed her mind. The blinding smoke, the sound of coughing and screams, the weight of unconscious bodies dragged across steel floors, slick with fuel and blood. I went in 3 times, she whispered. Dragged out who I could, pulled them through fire, through collapsing beams. The last time, she stopped, her throat closing. Hayes leaned forward slightly. The last time, she forced herself to continue. The last time the explosion caught me. Shrapnel in my side, burns down my arm. I barely made it out. But I left men behind, sir. Too many. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back, jaw tight. They pinned a medal on me when I was still in the hospital. Called me a hero. But I wasn't. Heroes don't leave people behind. For a long moment, the room was utterly still. Admiral Hayes studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Collins, do you think you dishonored the men you couldn't save by saving the ones you did? Emma's head snapped up, eyes burning. I should have done more. I should have died with them. Hayes cut in sharply. Would that have honored them? Would that have been better? Her lips trembled, but no sound came. The Admiral's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. You risked your life 3 times. You saved lives that would have been lost without you. That is what this medal means. Not perfection, not immortality, but courage under fire. Emma looked down, shaking her head. You don't understand. After it was over, I couldn't breathe without seeing their faces. The Navy made speeches, but all I heard were the screams. I couldn't stand the word hero. That's why I transferred here. Somewhere quiet, somewhere invisible, somewhere I could disappear. Hayes leaned back slowly, folding his hands. You think the world lets heroes disappear? You think you can erase what you did by hiding in my ammunition bay? She didn't answer. She couldn't. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if coming to a decision. Collins, you're wasted where you are. Whatever demons you carry, you don't get to bury them under crates of ammunition. Not on my ship. You belong on the front line. Leading, not hiding. Emma's stomach clenched. The thought of returning to that life, of facing it all again, filled her with dread. Sir, please, don't do this. I can't. Hayes raised a hand, silencing her. You've already proven what you're capable of. Whether you want it or not, the truth is out. And I don't intend to let one of my sailors rot in the shadows when she's already shown she can shine. He picked up the medal, turned it once in his hand, and set it firmly in front of her. You will wear this, not for yourself. For them, for the ones you saved, and for the ones you couldn't. Their memory deserves no less. Emma stared at the medal, the weight of it pressing down like a stone. Her voice trembled. Sir, I don't know if I'm strong enough. The Admiral's gaze was steady. Strength isn't about never breaking, Collins. It's about standing up after. You do, and I think you're stronger than you realize. When Emma left the office, the medal clutched tightly in her hand. She felt the eyes of the ship on her. Word had already spread. Sailors she barely knew glanced her way with curiosity, with respect, with something that made her stomach twist. Ramirez caught her outside the passageway. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Emma, is it true? Did you really do all that?" She tried to brush past him. "It's nothing." But Ramirez stepped in front of her, shaking his head. "It's not nothing. People deserve to know." Emma's voice hardened. "People deserve to remember the men who didn't make it. Not me." And with that, she pushed past him, walking back toward the ammunition bay. But the metal still burned in her palm, a reminder she couldn't throw away. That night, Emma lay awake in her bunk, staring at the dim ceiling of the berthing compartment. Around her, the other sailors slept, their breathing soft and steady. But she couldn't rest. Her mind replayed the Admiral's words, the fire, the screams, the faces she had lost. The metal sat on the small shelf by her pillow, gleaming faintly in the darkness. She wanted to shove it back into the depths of her locker, bury it under layers of uniforms again. But something stopped her. Hayes's words echoed in her mind. "You will wear this, not for yourself, for them." Emma closed her eyes. She didn't know if she could ever be what the Admiral thought she was. But one thing was certain: her days of hiding were over, and the ship had already begun to see her differently. The alarm blared without warning, shaking the steel corridors with a deafening urgency. Red lights flashed violently across the ammunition deck, casting twisted shadows over stacks of crates and metal shelving. Emma's head snapped up, muscles instantly primed for action. "Fire in the bay! Fire in the bay!" Someone screamed, voice nearly lost in the cacophony of alarms. Panic erupted like a tidal wave. Sailors shouted orders, ran in every direction, and the heat from the blaze began to creep into the room. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, stinging eyes and throats. Emma didn't hesitate. Years of experience surged forward, muscle memory overriding fear. She grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, scanning the room as she moved. The fire had started near a corner where several crates of powder were stacked precariously. If it spread, the entire deck could erupt. "Collins, over here!" Ramirez shouted, waving her toward a group of trapped sailors. She sprinted across the slick steel floor, dodging fallen tools and panicked crew, and reached them. Two of the younger sailors were coughing violently, their eyes wide with terror. "Follow my lead," she barked. "Stay low, keep your heads down, and move toward the exit." The group hesitated, fear rooting them in place. Emma's voice sharpened, authoritative. "Now." She grabbed one sailor by the arm, dragging him low behind her. Smoke billowed around them, making it nearly impossible to see. Sparks flew from a nearby crate, and she could feel the heat burning her face. Her stomach twisted, but she focused. On each movement, step, duck, drag, push. Once the sailors were clear of immediate danger, Emma turned back to the fire. The flames had grown, licking the metal walls and threatening the rows of ammunition nearby. She assessed quickly. Water alone wouldn't be enough. Chemical extinguishers were the only solution. She shouted orders to the closest crew. "Form. Align. Fire suppression. Move, move." Some froze. Others obeyed, eyes wide, as they realized Emma had taken command. She barked directions, pointing, correcting, moving with a precision that left no room for hesitation. The chaos of the alarm became a symphony of action under her leadership. A crate near the fire exploded, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Emma staggered, but kept her balance, adrenaline pushing her forward. She knew panic would be contagious. One misstep, one faltering hand, and someone could be gravely injured. "Keep the line steady," she shouted, moving from extinguisher to extinguisher, spraying chemical retardant directly onto the flames. The smoke choked her, filling her lungs with grit, but she ignored it. This wasn't about her. It never had been. Ramirez struggled. Beside her, coughing violently. Emma grabbed his collar, dragging him back and covering his mouth with her sleeve. Focus. We can't stop now. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat poured down her face, mixed with soot and grime. Her muscles burned from the exertion, every movement exhausting. But the fire began to yield, the flames shrinking under the relentless assault. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the last ember was smothered. Smoke still curled from the corners, but the immediate danger had passed. Emma dropped to her knees, gasping for air, hands trembling from the effort. Around her, the crew exhaled, eyes wide in disbelief and awe. Is it over? One sailor asked shakily. Emma stood, wiping soot from her face. For now, she said, voice low but steady. Check every crate. Ensure nothing reignites, and report to your stations. Silence fell over the deck. Even the alarms, though still echoing faintly, seemed muted compared to the enormity of what had just occurred. Admiral Hayes arrived moments later, summoned by the alarm, moving with quick, deliberate steps. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scorched walls, the scattered equipment, and finally, the crew standing in stunned relief. Then his gaze settled on Emma. She was breathing hard, her uniform streaked with soot, her hair damp with sweat, but her posture remained erect. She had led, directed, and controlled chaos with a calmness and precision that few could match. Hayes's eyes narrowed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Petty Officer Collins, he said quietly, though everyone could hear, you just saved this ship and every life aboard it. The weight of his words hit her like a tidal wave. She looked down, shaking her head slightly. I didn't do it alone, sir. The crew, he cut her off. You took command. You gave direction where none existed. You made decisions in seconds that could have meant death or survival. That is leadership. That is courage. A murmur ran through the sailors nearby. Some nodded, others whispered to each other. For the first time in months, Emma felt a shift, not just in how the ship's crew saw her, but in how she saw herself. Ramirez sidled up, still coughing lightly, and whispered, I didn't know you were capable of that. I mean, wow. Emma managed a small, tired smile. Neither did I, she admitted. Hayes remained, his gaze unwavering. Collins, you can no longer hide. Not on this ship, not anywhere in the fleet. Today proved exactly who you are. The weight of the metal in her pocket seemed heavier now, no longer just a burden, but a symbol she had lived up to. She had hidden from it, denied it, but now she had embodied it. Through the smoke-filled corridors, the crew began moving with renewed energy, checking equipment, securing crates, and restoring order. They glanced at Emma as they passed, some with admiration, others with curiosity. It was a different respect, one earned not by words, but by action. Later, in the mess hall, whispers continued, but this time they carried awe. Did you see Collins down there? She didn't just fight the fire, she organized the whole day. Yeah, and kept the younger sailors alive. That's insane. She's one of us now, for real. Emma sat quietly, picking at her food, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. Ramirez slid in beside her, giving her a nod of respect. You're something else, Collins. I guess the Admiral was right. She gave a faint smile, shaking her head. I just did what had to be done. But she knew, deep down, it was more than that. She had faced fire, fear, and chaos, and emerged not hidden, but visible, undeniable. The crew had seen her truth. The Admiral had seen her truth, and now she could no longer run from it. Above deck, the Valor continued its steady march across the Pacific, engines humming like a heartbeat. The sun broke through the haze of smoke, glinting off metal surfaces, a reminder that even after destruction, light could prevail. Emma adjusted the metal pinned to her uniform, finally wearing it openly. It wasn't just recognition of the past, it was acknowledgement that courage, sacrifice, and leadership were hers to claim. The fire had tested her, forced her to step from the shadows, and in doing so, she had proven what she already knew. Invisibility was no longer necessary. Strength wasn't hidden. It was shown in the moments that mattered most. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a flicker of pride, not the hollow kind that had haunted her for years, but the real, hard-earned kind. She had faced fear, chaos, and memory, and she had survived. Not just survived, but led. And aboard the USS Valor, everyone knew it. The USS Valor was quiet that morning, a rare stillness after the chaos of the fire. The hum of engines under the hull was steady, almost meditative, and for the first time in weeks, Emma Collins felt the possibility of calm. She sat at the edge of her bunk, the metal gleaming against her uniform. Unlike before, it no longer felt like a burden, nor a ghost of guilt. It had become a symbol of resilience, of courage she had denied herself for far too long. Her mind drifted back to the fire in the ammunition bay, the shouts, the heat, the smoke. She remembered dragging sailors to safety, commanding them, making decisions that could have meant life or death. She had emerged alive, yes, but more than that, she had led, and the crew had followed. That was a weight no metal could convey, yet here it was, tangible, pinned to her chest. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral Hayes stepped in, his expression calm but perceptive. "Petty Officer Collins," he began, his tone carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command. "I trust the crew is in order?" Emma nodded, trying to hide the residual fatigue that clung to her muscles. "Yes, sir. They're checking equipment, securing the bay, and running safety drills as instructed." Hayes's gaze softened slightly, and for a moment, he allowed himself a rare smile. "Good. You performed admirably yesterday. Not just your actions, but your leadership. I've seen many sailors in my career, Collins, but few combine skill and courage with that level of calm under pressure." Emma felt a flush creep up her neck, but she forced her posture into formal respect. "Thank you, sir. It's just my duty." The Admiral shook his head. "No, it's more than duty. You embraced responsibility when others froze. You accepted risk when others hesitated. That is what distinguishes a leader from a follower." His words sank deep, echoing in the quiet of the room. Emma realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had always undervalued her own capacity for courage. The metal she had tried to hide now carried meaning beyond memory. It was validation she had denied herself. "Collins," Hayes continued, leaning forward slightly, "I will be recommending you for a commendation before the fleet. You deserve recognition, not for your medal alone, but for the integrity and bravery you've displayed in multiple instances, including yesterday." Emma's throat tightened. Recognition had always been terrifying, a spotlight she feared. But the fear now mingled with something else, pride, a warmth that eased the gnawing guilt she had carried for so long. "Sir, thank you," she whispered, barely able to form the words. Hayes nodded, standing and placing a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of both authority and approval. "Remember this, Collins. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. Never forget that, even when the world tells you to hide." The Admiral left, and for the first time, Emma was alone with her thoughts without the weight of concealment pressing on her chest. Later, in the mess hall, the crew had gathered for breakfast. Normally, Emma would have sat quietly in the corner, unnoticed and unassuming. But today, something was different. The young sailor she had helped guide during the fire approached her, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Petty Officer Collins once said, voice slightly shaky, I just wanted to thank you. Yesterday, you saved us. Another nodded, eyes wide with genuine admiration. We wouldn't have made it without you. You're incredible. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but found that words were inadequate. Instead, she simply nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Even Ramirez, usually brash and outspoken, approached her with quiet reverence. I guess the Admiral was right. You're amazing. I mean it, Collins. You led us like a pro. Emma shook her head, laughing softly, almost disbelieving. I just did what I had to. That's all. But inside, she knew it was more than that. The crew saw her courage, her resolve, her humanity. She had stopped hiding, and in doing so, allowed herself to be seen, not for the medal, not for recognition, but for the actions that had defined her all along. In the following days, word of her heroism spread beyond the ammunition deck. Officers who had once only known her as quiet, unassuming Petty Officer Collins now regarded her with respect. Sailors in other departments glanced her way with curiosity, admiration, and newfound camaraderie. The invisible weight she had carried for years began to lift. Emma took on additional responsibilities, guiding new recruits, training crews in emergency protocols, and mentoring younger sailors who looked to her as an example of both skill and courage. She found herself speaking at briefings, explaining procedures with clarity, calm, and authority. The medal she once hid now adorned her uniform proudly. It wasn't a badge of vanity. It was a symbol of the lives she had touched, the crises she had faced, and the integrity she had demonstrated. Each time she caught its gleam in the polished surfaces of the ship, she felt a quiet affirmation of her worth, not the hollow recognition of the past, but the earned respect of the present. One evening, after her duties were complete, Emma stood on the deck of the USS Valor, watching the sunset over the endless Pacific. The sky blazed with shades of orange and crimson, reflected in the calm waters that stretched to the horizon. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The fires, the battles, the losses, they were all part of her story. The medal, once a symbol of guilt, was now a reminder of what she had endured, what she had survived, and what she could achieve. Ramirez joined her silently, standing just a step behind. Neither spoke for a while, content with the quiet end, the fading light. Finally, he said, You've changed things, you know, not just for yourself, but for all of us. The way you led yesterday, it made a difference. Emma nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. I guess. Maybe it's time I stop hiding. Maybe it's time to own who I am. All of it. Ramirez smiled. Yeah, you're not just Collins anymore. You're a leader. A real one. She allowed herself to smile, a genuine, unguarded expression. For the first time in years, the shadows of guilt and fear felt distant. She had faced fire, literally and figuratively, and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. Days later, a formal ceremony was held on the flight deck. Sailors stood at attention, uniforms immaculate, eyes forward. Admiral Hayes presided, his presence commanding yet proud. Petty Officer Emma Collins, he announced, voice carrying across the deck. For exemplary courage, leadership under fire, and dedication to the lives of your fellow sailors, you are hereby commended for your valor. Applause rang out, echoing against the metal surfaces of the carrier. Emma stood rigid, chest lifted, metal gleaming proudly. The acknowledgement was more than official recognition. It was a collective validation of the trials she had endured, and the heroism she had always carried quietly. As the applause died down, she glanced around at her crew. Their eyes were filled with admiration, respect, and something else, inspiration. She had shown them that courage was not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it was quiet, deliberate, and steadfast. Sometimes it was carried in the heart of a woman who simply refused to hide. Emma allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to honor both the past and the present. The lives she had saved, the losses she had endured, and the lessons she had learned, all had led to this moment of clarity and acceptance. Later, standing alone on the deck as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma touched the metal lightly. She whispered a quiet promise to the men and women she had served alongside, to the ones she had saved and to those she could not save. "We'll carry this," she said softly. "Not for myself, but for all of you." The wind caught her hair, the ocean shimmered beneath the fading light, and for the first time, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. The shadows of guilt and concealment had been replaced by strength, purpose, and recognition. She had faced fire, fear, and the weight of the past, and she had emerged honored, respected, and fully herself. The USS Valor sailed on, a silent witness to her journey, as Emma Collins, once hidden, now stood in full view, a living testament to courage, sacrifice, and the quiet power of a hero revealed.